world is changing faster than ever. And at the center of it all, Donald Trump. For decades, the United States has been the world's dominant power, shaping global politics, leading military alliances, and acting as the so-called leader of the free world. But that era might be coming to an end. Trump's return to the White House signals a seismic shift in how America engages with the world. Under his leadership, the US is turning inward, prioritizing its own interests over long-standing global commitments, NATO, the United Nations, and other international alliances. He sees them as burdens rather than benefits, and now his allies, including Elon Musk, are pushing him to take it even further. They want America to withdraw from NATO and the UN entirely. Could this really happen? And if it does, what would the consequences be? Let's break it down. The end of US global leadership. To understand what's happening now, we need a quick history lesson. For decades, the world order was defined by two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the US was left as the undisputed global superpower. It was a unipolar world, one where America called the shots. They bombed Yugoslavia, they invaded Iraq, they occupied Afghanistan. They reshaped international institutions. Whether you agreed with their actions or not, one thing was clear: nobody could stop them. But that era is over. Under Trump, the US is losing interest in its global role. Allies are becoming rivals. Former enemies are turning into partners. And countries that once depended on American leadership are now scrambling to find alternatives. We're no longer looking at a unipolar world. The new question is, what comes next? Trump's radical approach, Donald Trump, has already pulled the US out of major international agreements, the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Accords, and the UN Human Rights Council. But now things are escalating. His allies want a full withdrawal from NATO and the UN. Elon Musk, one of Trump's biggest supporters, has publicly backed the idea of leaving NATO. And within Trump's inner circle, the calls to abandon global commitments are growing louder. So let's ask the big question: can Trump actually pull out of NATO and the UN? Is it even possible? Legally, the US president cannot just pull out of NATO overnight. There's a law requiring a 2/3 majority in Congress to approve such a move. But some legal experts believe Trump could bypass this, either by cutting funding, ignoring commitments, or simply refusing to cooperate. If that happens, NATO would be in serious trouble. As for the United Nations, there's no official exit process in the UN Charter. Countries can be expelled, but they can't technically leave on their own. However, Trump doesn't need to formally leave. He can just stop participating. No diplomats, no funding, no involvement. Effectively, the US would be out. And if that happens, the consequences will be massive. What happens next? If the US pulls out of NATO, the alliance will collapse almost immediately. Why? It may. Because America's military budget is larger than the next 10 NATO countries combined. Without US funding and firepower, NATO becomes meaningless. And you know who would love that? Vladimir Putin. For years, Russia has been pushing back against NATO expansion. If Trump dismantles the alliance, Russia's influence in Europe will skyrocket. But Russia wouldn't be the only winner. China has long wanted to dominate international institutions. If the US withdraws from the UN, China will take over. They've already infiltrated key UN agencies, like the World Health Organization, and without US opposition, they'll rewrite global rules in their favor. The result? A completely different world order, where authoritarian regimes like China and Russia hold more power than ever before. A new world disorder? So what comes next? If the US abandons its global commitments, the world will be forced to adapt. Europe is already increasing military spending, preparing for a future where they can't rely on American protection. Russia and the US might actually start cooperating, focusing on arms control and military agreements. And in Asia, countries like Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea will have to rethink their defense strategies, because if Trump won't defend NATO, he definitely won't defend them. The bottom line? The world is moving from order to chaos. What was once a clear power structure is now a battleground of competing interests. Some call it multipolarity, others call it the end of stability. So here's the big question. Is this really Trump's vision for America? Or is it just the beginning of something even bigger?